Good evening, Mr. Bond fans, and welcome once again. Ian Fleming himself undoubtedly set the standard when it came to creating interesting, intricate, and detailed plots to drop our favourite secret agent into time and time again. Fleming's love for a dastardly villain plot is often translated to the films, and while some of the stories can be quite complex, they are nonetheless very rewarding to see play out, and ultimately foiled by 007. However, not all of these plots are airtight, and there are a good few contrivances and frankly gaping holes that Bond fans need to occasionally overlook to get the most out of these stories. And in this video we'll be looking at 6 of the biggest plot holes, as well as talking through some possible ways of pouring some contrivance cement in those holes to potentially cover them up. These choices aren't necessarily going to be presented in a ranked order, but more I'll be judging each plot hole on its own basis, and specifically on how disruptive it is to a viewer's enjoyment to the film, or if it kind of gets away with it, whether it's a pass or a fail, basically. So with all that in mind, let's get started, shall we, with one of the most beloved films in the series, Skyfall. Number 6. A massive crowd pleaser, 2012 Skyfall saw Javier Bardem's villainous Silva seeking revenge on Judi Dench's M, with Daniel Craig's James Bond taking on the role of Protector. In the broad strokes, it's one of the more simple Bond villain schemes and more grounded and personal than a lot of them, and yet, despite all of Skyfall's rightfully deserved critical acclaim, there are still a good few plot holes that pop up and become more glaring on repeated viewing. I'm going to focus on one of the biggest in the film in this instance, which is Silva's escape plan. The villain is being held by MI6, and Q and Bond hook up the villain's laptop to figure out what he's been up to, which ultimately leads to them being hacked, and Silva escapes through subterranean London. His henchpeople seem to know exactly where to be to give him a policeman uniform so that he can disguise himself, lose Bond in a crowd of actual policemen, and then set off an explosion, which just so happens to be perfectly placed to almost land an entire tube carriage on 007, so that the villain could eventually get to an inquiry hearing to kill his former boss. Where to begin with this? Let me start off by saying I love this whole sequence, and it's really one of my favourite scenes in the film. I think it's really well constructed and so well done that when you're watching the film or viewing it for the first time, the contrivances might not seem immediately obvious, but when you do see them, oi boy. I mean, to sum it up, it's very hard to believe that Silva would have been able to time all of his various machinations to such a degree when a good chunk of triggering all of this was kind of out of his hands. I mean, the thing that sets everything into motion is Q plugging in Silva's computer, and the sequence is edited in a way to almost imply that Silva knows what has happened. Immediately after Q plugs it in, we cut to Silva in a meditative pose, and he exhales as if he knows that things are set into motion, like he has a psychic link with his laptop. He has no way of knowing this, and besides that, what if Q had a sick day today, or what if he'd just even plugged into the laptop 20 minutes later? I mean, things would have played out very differently. Bond, of course, pursues as the villain escapes, who has timed this all so well that he knows exactly when to pass by his henchman to pick up a disguise package. I mean, again, the timing on this, on Silva's part, is impeccable. What would his henchman have done if he'd have been just like a minute or 30 seconds late? He's also damn lucky that he just so happens to pass by some kind of policeman convention so that he can just blend in and lose Bond. But to be fair, the villain does play this thing off as like, well, as if almost like he can't believe his own luck. But the biggest contrivance of the whole thing is probably the crashing tube. I mean, the fact that it's placed just so that it would land on Bond and all this. I mean, you can explain this away as just, again, I guess it's luck on Silva's part. The tube was just always part of his plan to cause maximum disruption, and he just got lucky that the man who was pursuing him would be stood in just the right spot. But still, it's a lot to swallow. And then finally, M's insistence on reading out her damn poem at the end of the hearing seems to have been integral to Silva's timings. Like, people are getting ready to go, and yet because of her insisting, proceedings have to continue only so Silva can burst in on everything. It's basically asking us to believe that Silva's timings were so immaculately planned that all of this could actually happen.
Bond, this isn't an escape, this was years in the planning.
He wanted us to capture him, he wanted us to access his computer. It was all planned.
Blowing up HQ, following the emergency protocols, knowing we'd retreat down here.
And this is quite clearly nonsense. However, the entire sequence is so expertly paced, shot, edited, the shootout in the inquiry is an exciting climax to proceedings that overall, despite all of the gaps in logic, this sequence still does really work well as an entertaining piece. Silva's incredibly convoluted escape just barely gets a pass from me.
Seems you've passed by the skin of your teeth.
Number 5. One of the classics here, both in terms of the film itself and the plot hole. I think this is one of the more widely acknowledged ones in the fan community, and most known. Goldfinger has assembled a load of mobsters together who are going to help in his evil scheme to get into Fort Knox, and he's going to the effort of explaining his plan in detail to them. One of the mobsters, Mr. Solo, wants nothing to do with this and so is excused, and as is the case with Bond villains, whenever there's a cheeky non-conformist in the group, they are taken away to be dispatched of, which is what happens to Mr. Solo, while all of the other mobsters who opted to stay are dispatched off anyway. Why would Goldfinger go to the lengths of explaining his whole plan to everyone if he's just gonna kill them all anyway? And what's the point, if he's gonna kill them all anyway, what is the point of making that special exception for that one guy and going to the effort of giving him his gold, having the car crushed, getting him shot, all that kind of stuff, if you're just going to kill everyone anyway? The obvious answer from a filmmaking perspective is that we need to tell the audience what Goldfinger is up to. Bond overhears all of this too, of course, so he gets to know more about the plot, but it's a very clunky device to do this and then just kill everyone immediately after, especially when everyone except Mr. Solo seemed quite interested in getting in on Goldfinger's scheme. It keeps the story streamlined to dispense of the gangsters in this way so that we don't have them hanging around for the rest of the film, and the movie is all the better for it. I didn't need a bunch of gangsters to be looking over Goldfinger's shoulder as he broke into Fort Knox. It just doesn't make much sense why Goldfinger would be making such an exception for Mr. Solo. Or maybe while he was taking Mr. Solo outside, Goldfinger just thought, whatever, I've had a change of heart, I don't need these mobsters anyway, and killing everyone was just kind of a moment of inspiration on his part. Either way, it's still a plot hole, but it's not nearly as intrusive as some of the others we're going to be getting to, so Goldfinger's Mobster Massacre gets a pass.
You're joking.
I never joke about my work, 007.
Number 4. This one takes some setting up to explain, so please do bear with me. In Diamonds Are Forever, Bond meets the lovely Plenty O'Toole, and the pair head to Bond's Vegas hotel room, but are interrupted by a bunch of goons who promptly eject Ms. O'Toole from the window, and then Bond is left alone in the room to find Tiffany Case in bed. The pair sleep together, and then there's about 10 minutes of shenanigans at Circus Circus in which Tiffany Case ultimately double-crosses Bond, and then Case heads back to her home, where Bond is waiting, and Plenty O'Toole is dead in Tiffany's pool, as Bond explains.
Supposed to be you, the next link in the pipeline.
What are you talking about?
Poor Plenty must have stumbled in here looking for you.
Which does beg the question, why would Plenty O'Toole, a completely peripheral character in terms of the whole villain's plot and the story and everything, she has nothing to do with anything, she's literally just a random bystander becoming involved in things. Why would she storm into Tiffany Case's house looking for her? How would she even know where to go? And, I mean, the pair haven't even shared the screen together, so they have no history together as characters as far as we, the audience, know. In this instance, we're able to piece together what was originally intended through some deleted material. A scene was removed from the film which showed Plenty O'Toole returning to the hotel suite, seeing Bond and Case together, and then going through the latter's things to find her address. She would then have marched over to Tiffany's the following day, presumably to confront her about losing out on ripping some money out of Bond. We get the sense that Plenty O'Toole just kind of goes from rich bloke to rich bloke, sort of scamming them for money. But while she's at the home, assassins Mr. Winter, Mr. Kidd would mistake Plenty for Tiffany and kill her, much like they have everyone else involved in the diamond smuggling chain. So that all makes sense, but without those scenes actually in the film, it makes little to no sense. And to be honest, when I was a kid, it took me a very long time to even know that this lady in the pool was Plenty O'Toole, the lady from earlier on, purely because I couldn't connect why that character would be in Tiffany Case's pool. I mean, it would have made about as much sense if Sammy Davis Jr. was in there. I guess this also speaks to how much is going on in the plot of Diamonds Are Forever, and how much of it you just kind of let wash over you. This is a plot hole without a doubt, but it's certainly one that I think is complained about the least in the Bond fan community, perhaps speaking to how the film itself is not one that people get terribly passionate about. But nonetheless, this is one of the more glaring and baffling plot holes in all of Bond, and as such does not get a pass from me.
Well, it just proves no one's indestructible.
Number 3. A much smaller plot hole here, but one of the most inexplicable ones in all of Bond. A lot of plot holes in Bond ultimately take a lot of legwork to kind of make work, but you can always kind of get there more or less with a good deal of contrivances. With this one though, I have literally no idea how you make this make sense. Bond has just escaped a villainous fighting dojo with the help of his colleague Hip and his 2 nieces. Hip conveniently has a car to hand, so the foursome run to it to attempt to escape. Hip gets in the driver's seat, the niece is in the back, Bond is running around to the passenger side to get in, and Hip just drives off? Obviously, this is the way it is so that Bond can run off into a boat chase sequence, and that's all well and good. I understand that these things are constructed in the way they are to facilitate the character going from one exciting sequence to the next, but the internal logic here is just non-existent. Why would Hip just drive off and leave Bond behind? They're on the same side. I mean, he arrived there to save him, so, I mean, this isn't a malicious thing. There isn't any beef between them. Presumably his whole point in showing up was to rescue Bond, so why would he drive off without him? The only contrivance I can lay on this is that I think we're to believe that Hip thinks that Bond got into the back with the girls, but then he looks over his shoulder and presumably he'd see Bond running behind the car in the rearview mirror or something, so why not just stop and let him in? I mean, it is a big old plot hole to get Bond to the next exciting situation, but I would just love to have been on the set the day that they filmed this to hear what the people involved even thought they were doing. Like, did they think that this made sense in the moment, or did they think they'd make sense of it at a later stage, maybe on a set or something with some back projection? It's a completely bizarre moment and a hard one to overlook, and as such, this does also not pass.
Of all the fouled up, half-witted operation.
Number 2. One of the more egregious plot holes here, but one that really only applies if you're watching the films in order, or really start to think about the chronology. In On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Bond is sent undercover to Blofeld's mountaintop lair to investigate what the villain is up to. The pair meet many times during the course of the film, have conversations, etc., until Bond's promiscuity eventually rumbles his cover and Blofeld figures out that it is actually 007.
Takes more than a few props to turn 007 into a herald.
The problem with this is, they met each other in the last movie, so Blofeld should know right away who the hell this guy is. On Her Majesty's Secret Service takes place after You Only Live Twice in the film chronology, where Bond and Blofeld meet and are introduced, and while Bond may well be undercover in Majesties and affecting a different voice, it's hard to believe it would take only that to completely baffle those around him.
Where do I go for this meeting?
They're being a bit canny about that. They want me to send a description of myself.
Tactfully adjusted to favour me.
Where'd he go? I swear James Bond was sat right there a second ago. Where'd he go? Where'd he go? There isn't much in the way of an in-universe explanation for why Blofeld wouldn't just right away immediately recognize Bond as the man who blew up his expensive volcano base. It's more of a result of them wanting to be faithful to the original Fleming plot in which Bond and Blofeld hadn't met. The book Majesty's Secret Service takes place before You Only Live Twice, and don't come at me with the whole James Bond is a codename theory thing, because, I mean, that was never the filmmaker's intentions, and if Bond is a codename, then surely Blofeld is a codename too, given his appearance change also. Maybe this detail washes over most people because the actors are different, obviously, to what were in the previous film, but if this was Pleasance and Connery returning to their roles from the previous movie, they would have undoubtedly had to do things differently, but given that Majesty's Secret Service is the masterwork it is, it's a plot hole that, while ultimately one of the biggest in the entire series, it has never really affected my enjoyment of the overall film, and as such, this one actually gets a pass.
There's a lot more to tell, but there'll be plenty of time later.
Number 1. The Goldeneye pre-title sequence is one of the best in the entire series, and marked the beginning of a hugely successful first outing for Pierce Brosnan. The sequence shows 007 and 006, played by Sean Bean, infiltrating a chemical weapons factory with the goal of blowing it up. In the action, 006 is captured and presumably killed, but Bond escapes and the factory explodes. Later on in the film, however, 006, Alex Trevelyan, is revealed to in fact be alive, and the whole thing was a ruse, and he's a big dastardly villain, and it's a really good twist, but it does beg the question, if it was all a ruse, why didn't 006 just kill Bond at literally any point during that opening mission? The immediate answer would be that I suppose that they'd want Bond to escape to tell the tale of Alec's death to make it more genuine, but as Alex says in the film, the intention was for Bond to perish.
Am I supposed to feel sorry for you?
No. You're supposed to die for me.
So why didn't Alec just kill him at any point? Why did Orumov fake kill Alec when Bond was literally about to surrender himself for his friend? Why did they let the chemical plant explode if they knew that was the mission the whole time? How come Orumov's gun is fake for Alec but then totally real for this guy? If the intention was to let Bond escape, surely they'd have facilitated a more sure way for him to do so rather than diving off a cliff after a falling plane. I don't think any of this would bother a first-time viewer, and when you're watching the film, obviously from Bond's perspective, it doesn't really enter into it, but when you start thinking about this whole complicated scheme from the villain's perspective, it kinda starts to fall apart. Ultimately, it is just a bit of lazy writing and something that could have probably been smoothed out with another pass of the script. Goldeneye is a terrific film, and despite this being a heck of a massive plot hole, I don't think it's actually terribly bothersome to the good time experience that the film provides, so Goldeneye also gets a pass.
Closing time, James! Last call! I'm your pint!
But am I being too generous? Please do let me know in the comment section below if you agree or disagree with my pass and fails, and if there are any other big plot holes in the series that really bother you. I think there are a good deal in the series, and I've just talked about 6 of the ones that spring to my mind immediately, but there are plenty more out there, and I'm well aware that I could do a follow-up video to this, so please do let me know if you would like me to cover any other plot holes in the series in a future installment in the comments section below. Also below you can find links to my social media pages, so there is my Twitter page, which I'm quite active on these days, so please do follow me on there if you're on that site. There's also my Facebook page, my Patreon page, for those of you who want to go one extra step in supporting this channel. And also, you can just support me on here by hitting the like button, or even better, the subscribe button, if you haven't already. And with all that being said, until next time, Bond fans, so long for now.